The first mistake people make when they are disrespected is believing they must respond immediately. They feel the insult, the embarrassment, the anger, and within seconds they want to strike back. They want to explain themselves. They want to prove that they are not weak. They want the other person to understand exactly who they are. But powerful people understand something different. The first reaction is often the reaction with the least control. When someone disrespects you, your emotions may tell you to respond instantly. Your pride may demand an answer. Your anger may convince you that silence means weakness. But before you do anything, create distance between the event and your response. Pause. That pause is not surrender. It is control. Anyone can react. Not everyone can remain composed long enough to choose a response. Imagine someone insults you in front of other people. They expect you to become emotional. They expect your voice to rise. They expect you to defend yourself desperately or attack them in return. If you immediately give them that reaction, they have already influenced your behavior. They pushed a button. You responded. Now they know the button exists. This is why emotional control is one of the strongest forms of personal power. You don't have to become emotionless. You simply refuse to allow someone else's behavior to dictate your next move. Take a breath. Slow your speech. Listen carefully. Ask yourself what actually happened. Was this genuine disrespect? Was it simply disagreement? Was the person trying to provoke you? Was it careless behavior? Was it a misunderstanding? Or was there a repeated pattern that needs a boundary? These questions change everything because not every uncomfortable moment deserves confrontation. Sometimes people say things because they are angry. Sometimes they are insecure. Sometimes they are trying to get a reaction. Sometimes they genuinely made a mistake. And sometimes they are deliberately crossing a line. Your strength is not in treating every situation the same. Your strength is knowing the difference. If you react to everything, you become predictable. Anyone can disturb your peace by saying the right words. Anyone can make you angry. Anyone can pull you into an argument. Anyone can steal your attention. But when you learn to pause, you take that power back. This doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. Understand that clearly. Calmness is not permission. You can be calm and still be firm. You can speak softly and still make your boundary unmistakable. You can walk away without being afraid. You can confront someone without losing control. The difference is that your response comes from intention rather than impulse. Think about the difference between a person who says, "How dare you speak to me like that?" while losing control, and someone who calmly says, "Don't speak to me that way." The second person may use fewer words, but the message carries more weight. Why? Because there is no emotional desperation behind it. There is certainty. And certainty doesn't need to scream. Start practicing this in ordinary situations. When someone annoys you, don't answer immediately. When someone sends a message designed to provoke you, don't type while you're angry. When someone criticizes you publicly, don't feel obligated to defend every detail immediately. Give yourself time. Ask yourself whether responding will actually improve the situation. Sometimes the strongest response is a clear sentence. Sometimes it is silence. Sometimes it is distance. And sometimes action is necessary. But you should decide that after your emotions settle, not while they are controlling you. The person who learns to regulate their emotions becomes difficult to control because provocation stops producing automatic results. They can be insulted without becoming reckless. They can be criticized without collapsing. They can be challenged without becoming defensive. They can be angry without becoming destructive. That is the beginning of real power. And once you master that pause, you are ready to recognize something even more important. Not every disagreement is disrespect, and knowing the difference will determine how wisely you use your strength. One of the most important skills you can develop is learning that not everything that hurts your pride is disrespect. If you treat every disagreement as an attack, you will spend your life defending yourself against people who were never trying to defeat you. You will argue when you should be listening, become defensive when you should be thinking, and create enemies where there were simply different opinions. Powerful people understand the difference. They don't need everyone to agree with them. They don't need every conversation to end with them being right. And they don't interpret every uncomfortable statement as an insult. Someone can disagree with your decision without disrespecting you. Someone can criticize your work without attacking your character. Someone can tell you that you're wrong without trying to humiliate you. Someone can have a completely different opinion without becoming your enemy. That distinction requires emotional maturity. Ask yourself what actually happened before deciding how to respond. Did the person challenge an idea, or did they attack you personally? Did they express a different perspective, or were they deliberately trying to embarrass you? Did they make a mistake, or is there a repeated pattern of treating you without respect? The answers matter. Imagine you're working with someone and they tell you, "I don't think this plan will work." Your ego might immediately hear, "You're incompetent." But those are not the same message. The first is feedback. The second is an attack. If you confuse the two, you lose the ability to learn. Powerful people can hear criticism without automatically becoming defensive because their confidence doesn't depend on being perfect. They can say, "Maybe you're right." They can ask, "What do you see that I don't?" They can change their position when the evidence changes. That isn't weakness, that's strength. Weak confidence needs constant protection. Real confidence can survive disagreement. But there is another side to this. Some people deliberately disguise disrespect as honesty. They say, "I'm just being honest," after making a cruel comment. They say, "I'm only joking," after humiliating someone. They say, "You need to toughen up," after repeatedly crossing a boundary. Don't let labels confuse you. Honesty without respect can become cruelty. And a joke that repeatedly targets someone's dignity stops being harmless simply because someone calls it a joke. This is where discernment becomes important. You don't have to become hypersensitive. You simply need to recognize patterns. One careless comment may be exactly that, a careless comment, but repeated humiliation, insults disguised as jokes, constant undermining, or deliberate attempts to make you feel small or different. The pattern matters more than the isolated moment. Powerful people don't waste energy trying to prove that every person who disagrees with them is wrong. They listen, they evaluate, they decide. And when genuine disrespect appears, they don't need to question their own worth. They already know where they stand. This is why your internal confidence matters so much. If your self-worth is unstable, even a small disagreement can feel like a threat. You begin defending yourself before anyone has actually attacked you. You explain too much. You argue too long. You need the last word. You try to make everyone understand your intentions. But when you become secure, you can tolerate being misunderstood. You can walk away from an argument without feeling defeated. You can hear criticism without accepting every part of it. You can reject an opinion without attacking the person who gave it. That is emotional freedom. And remember, not every battle deserves your energy. Sometimes someone is simply wrong about you. Let them be wrong. Sometimes someone doesn't understand your decision. You don't have to convince them. Sometimes someone disagrees with your values. They are allowed to have different values. Your responsibility is not to control every person's opinion of you. Your responsibility is to know your standards and live according to them. That is why the powerful person doesn't ask, "How do I win this argument?" They ask, "Is there actually something here that requires my response?" If the answer is no, they move forward. If the answer is yes, they address it calmly, and that leads to the next level of strength. Knowing how to establish a boundary without losing the composure you worked so hard to develop. Once you have learned to control your emotions and recognize the difference between disagreement and genuine disrespect, the next step is learning how to establish a boundary without losing your composure. Because knowing when something crosses the line means very little if you are unwilling to protect that line. A boundary is not a threat. It is not a performance. It is not an invitation to an argument. A boundary is simply a clear statement about what you will and will not accept. Powerful people understand that they don't need to become aggressive to be taken seriously. They don't need to raise their voice, insult someone back, or make dramatic threats. Their strength comes from clarity. When someone crosses a line, they don't create a complicated speech. They make the situation simple. That isn't acceptable. Don't speak to me that way. I won't continue this conversation if you insult me. If you want to discuss this, we can do it respectfully. Notice what is missing. There is no desperation, no long explanation, no attempt to humiliate the other person, no emotional explosion, just clarity. This matters because the more you explain a boundary, the more opportunities you sometimes give someone to argue with it. You don't need to convince someone that your boundary is reasonable before you are allowed to have it. You can simply state it. But there is an important principle here. A boundary without action is often just a request. If someone repeatedly crosses a line and you repeatedly warn them without changing your behavior, eventually they learn that your words have no consequences. You say, "Don't treat me like that," but continue giving them unlimited access. You say, "I won't tolerate this," but continue participating in the same argument every time. You say, "This is the last time," and then accept the same behavior again. Your boundary becomes negotiable. Powerful people understand that consequences don't have to be dramatic. Sometimes the consequence is ending the conversation. Sometimes it is leaving the environment. Sometimes it is reducing contact. Sometimes it is no longer sharing personal information. Sometimes it is deciding that someone doesn't get the same level of access to you anymore. You don't need revenge. You need consistency. And consistency is what makes a boundary believable. Imagine someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully. The first time you calmly address it. The second time you remind them. If the pattern continues, you don't need to keep delivering longer speeches about respect. You change your access. You step back. You stop participating in the cycle. That communicates something stronger than anger ever could. It says, "You are responsible for your behavior, and I am responsible for deciding what I allow around me." This is also where many people misunderstand confidence. They think confidence means being intimidating. It doesn't. Confidence means being secure enough to remain calm while protecting yourself. You can be respectful without being submissive. You can be kind without being available to everyone. You can forgive someone without giving them the same access again. You can care about someone without accepting repeated disrespect from them. Those distinctions make you stronger, and your tone matters. When you are emotionally controlled, speak slower, use fewer words, don't rush to fill silence, don't keep repeating yourself. Say what needs to be said, then stop. The silence afterward can be powerful because it gives the other person the responsibility of deciding what happens next. If they correct themselves, you have information. If they become more aggressive, you have information. If they dismiss your boundary, you have information. If they respect it, you have information. Every response reveals something. And remember, boundaries are not only for other people. You need boundaries with yourself too. Don't allow your own anger to make decisions. Don't send messages you will regret. Don't chase people after they disrespect you simply because you fear losing them. Don't betray your own standards just to maintain temporary peace. Sometimes the person you need to establish a boundary with is yourself. You need to decide that your dignity is not something you trade for acceptance. When you live this way, people begin understanding that access to you comes with standards. They don't have to fear you. They simply understand that disrespect has consequences. And once you can establish boundaries calmly and consistently, you reach an even deeper level of power. Learning when not to give disrespect your attention at all. Not every act of disrespect deserves your attention. This is one of the hardest lessons to learn because the instinctive reaction is to defend yourself, prove your point, or make the other person understand that they crossed a line. But sometimes, the moment you give disrespect your full emotional attention, you give the person exactly what they wanted. Attention is a form of energy, and powerful people become selective about where they spend it. There are people who don't actually want a solution. They want a reaction. They provoke, criticize, mock, interrupt, or create unnecessary conflict because they know emotional reactions give them a sense of control. If you allow every provocation to pull you into an argument, they can influence your mood without even being important to you. That is a dangerous form of control. You don't have to accept disrespect, but you also don't have to perform your anger for the person who caused it. Sometimes silence is stronger, not because silence magically defeats someone, but because you refuse to participate in a pointless cycle. Imagine someone makes a provocative comment specifically to get you angry. You immediately respond. They respond again. You defend yourself. They attack again. Soon you're 10 minutes into an argument that never needed to happen. What did you gain? Nothing. You gave them your time, your attention, and your emotional energy. A powerful person asks a different question. Does responding improve my position? If the answer is no, they don't feel obligated to respond. This doesn't mean ignoring serious disrespect or allowing harmful behavior to continue. There are moments when you must speak clearly, protect yourself, or take appropriate action. But there is a difference between responding strategically and reacting emotionally. Strategic response is deliberate. Emotional reaction is automatic. One protects your interests, the other can expose them. This is why silence can sometimes be useful. It gives you time to observe what the other person does next. If someone insults you and you immediately argue, you may never see their real intention. But if you remain calm, the person may continue talking. And the more they talk, the more they reveal. They may expose insecurity. They may reveal jealousy. They may show that they simply wanted attention. Or they may realize they crossed a line and correct themselves. Your silence creates space for information. But don't turn silence into a manipulation tactic. Don't ignore someone just to make them anxious. Don't withhold communication to force someone to chase you. Don't use silence as punishment. That is not emotional control. That's another form of emotional dependence, because you're still focused on controlling their reaction. Real control means you don't need their reaction at all. You can walk away because the conversation isn't productive. You can stop responding because the relationship no longer deserves your energy. You can reduce access because someone repeatedly violates your standards. You don't need them to feel bad about it. You don't need them to regret it. You don't need them to come back and apologize before you can move forward. That is freedom. There is also power in refusing to defend yourself against every accusation. Some people will misunderstand you. Some will criticize you. Some will create stories about you. If your character depends on correcting every false statement, you will spend your life chasing other people's opinions. Let your consistency speak. If something genuinely important needs clarification, clarify it. If a serious situation requires action, take action. But don't turn every insult into a courtroom where you are forced to prove your innocence. Your life is too valuable for that. And when you stop rewarding disrespect with endless attention, people learn something about you. They learn that your emotional state isn't easily controlled. They learn that provoking you doesn't automatically produce access to you. They learn that your attention must be earned through meaningful interaction. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you selective. And selectivity is power. The strongest response is not always silence, and silence is not always the answer. Sometimes you speak, sometimes you leave, sometimes you set a boundary, sometimes you take action. The key is that you choose. You are no longer reacting simply because someone pushed a button. And once you stop giving every disrespectful person the power to consume your attention, you can focus on something much more powerful, building a reputation and a life so strong that temporary insults cannot define you. When you stop reacting to every insult, when you learn to distinguish disagreement from disrespect, and when you establish boundaries without losing your composure, something important begins to happen. You stop needing to defend your reputation with words because your actions start speaking for you. This is where real power becomes visible. A powerful person doesn't spend every day trying to convince everyone that they are intelligent, capable, disciplined, or worthy of respect. They build evidence. They become consistent. They keep their promises. They improve their skills. They handle pressure. They show up when they say they will. They remain composed when other people lose control. Over time, these behaviors create something stronger than an argument: credibility. And credibility protects your reputation in ways that emotional reactions never can. Think about it. If someone makes a false accusation against a person who has spent years behaving consistently, the accusation may create noise, but it doesn't automatically destroy the foundation. Why? Because people have evidence. They have seen the person's behavior. They know the pattern. This doesn't mean reputation is invincible. It isn't. But it does mean that the strongest defense against temporary disrespect is often long-term character. Your actions become your reputation, not your explanations, not your promises, not the image you try to create, your pattern. This is why powerful people focus so much on competence. Become good at something, then become better. Develop skills that create real value. Learn to communicate, learn to solve problems, learn to control your emotions, learn to manage your time, learn to make decisions under pressure. Every skill you develop gives you more independence, and independence changes the way you respond to disrespect. When you know you can stand on your own, you don't need to fight for approval from every person who questions you. You don't need to prove your worth to someone committed to misunderstanding you. You don't need to win every argument because your life itself provides evidence. This is also why consistency matters more than intensity. Anyone can act confident for one day. Anyone can make a powerful speech. Anyone can promise that they will change. But can you maintain your standards when nobody is watching? Can you stay disciplined when motivation disappears? Can you remain respectful when you're angry? Can you continue building while other people are distracted by gossip? That is where reputation is created, repeatedly, over time. And there is another lesson here. Don't destroy your own reputation by reacting to someone else's disrespect. Imagine someone insults you publicly and you respond with an even bigger insult. Now everyone remembers the conflict instead of the original behavior. You allowed their behavior to determine yours. Instead, remain measured. If you need to address the situation, address it. If you need to correct misinformation, correct it. If you need to protect yourself, protect yourself. But don't become the person you are trying to defend yourself against. Your standards must remain intact even when someone else abandons theirs. That is what makes composure powerful. You don't need to mirror chaos. You can remain stable while someone else becomes unstable. And eventually, people notice. They notice who constantly creates drama and who consistently creates results. They notice who talks about being powerful and who actually handles pressure well. They notice who demands respect and who naturally receives it because of their character. That is the kind of reputation worth building, not one based on fear, not one based on intimidation, not one based on making people afraid to challenge you. A reputation built on competence, reliability, discipline, and self-control is much stronger because it doesn't depend on everyone liking you. It depends on people knowing what you stand for. And once your actions have built that foundation, disrespect becomes less threatening. Someone can insult you. Someone can misunderstand you. Someone can criticize you, but they cannot easily erase years of consistent behavior. Your life becomes the evidence. So don't spend your energy trying to silence every person who speaks against you. Build. Improve. Let your behavior become so clear that temporary noise cannot define you. And when your reputation is built on actions rather than reactions, you become ready for the final decision, knowing exactly when to walk away, when to speak, and when action is necessary. Eventually, every situation involving disrespect comes down to one final decision. Do you stay, do you speak, or do you walk away? Powerful people understand that strength isn't measured by how many confrontations they can win. It is measured by how clearly they can decide what deserves their energy, what requires a boundary, and what no longer deserves access to their life. Sometimes you should speak. If someone crosses a line once and the relationship matters, address it directly. Don't expect people to read your mind. Calmly explain what happened and what you will not accept going forward. A simple conversation can prevent a small problem from becoming a permanent pattern. But sometimes talking isn't enough. If someone repeatedly ignores your boundaries, continues insulting you, manipulates every conversation, or treats your patience as permission, then the answer may not be another explanation. It may be distance. This is where many people lose their power. They keep giving unlimited chances because they are afraid that walking away will make them look weak. They tolerate disrespect because they fear losing the relationship. They continue explaining themselves because they hope the other person will finally understand. But you cannot force someone to respect a boundary they have repeatedly chosen to ignore. At some point, your responsibility changes. You stop trying to change them. You start deciding what you will do. That might mean ending the conversation. It might mean reducing contact. It might mean refusing to participate in the same argument again. And in serious situations, it may mean taking appropriate action to protect yourself, your work, your relationships, or your safety. The key is proportionality. Powerful people don't use a cannon to solve every small disagreement. They don't turn every irritation into a war. They respond according to the seriousness of the situation. A minor insult may not deserve anything. A repeated boundary violation deserves a clear conversation. A serious pattern of mistreatment may require distance. A genuinely dangerous situation may require immediate support and appropriate action. Wisdom is knowing the difference. And walking away does not mean you lost. Sometimes walking away means you finally stopped competing for respect from someone who had already demonstrated that they were unwilling to give it. You don't have to get the last word. You don't have to make them regret their behavior. You don't have to prove that you were right. You simply have to protect your peace and move forward. There is tremendous strength in leaving without revenge, because revenge keeps you psychologically connected to the person who disrespected you. You continue thinking about them. You continue imagining what they should have said. You continue planning how to make them feel what you felt. They may be physically gone, but mentally they still control your attention. That's not freedom. Freedom is when their behavior no longer determines your emotional state. You can remember what happened without becoming consumed by it. You can learn the lesson without carrying the anger forever. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can move forward without needing an apology. That is emotional control at its highest level. And there is another powerful principle. Never confuse access with entitlement. Just because someone once had access to you doesn't mean they have permanent access. Friendship doesn't create ownership. Love doesn't create ownership. History doesn't create ownership. If someone repeatedly violates the standards required for a healthy relationship, you are allowed to change their level of access. You can become more selective. You can become quieter. You can step back, not to punish them, to protect yourself. This is ultimately what powerful people understand about disrespect. They don't allow another person's behavior to determine who they become. They don't become cruel because someone was cruel. They don't become dishonest because someone betrayed them. They don't become desperate because someone rejected them. They learn, they adjust, they strengthen their boundaries, and then they keep moving. Because the goal was never to become feared for your temper. The goal was to become respected for your control. When you can remain calm under pressure, recognize genuine disrespect, establish clear boundaries, protect your attention, build a reputation through action, and walk away when necessary, you become very difficult to manipulate. Not because you control other people, because you finally control yourself. And that is the kind of power nobody can take from you.